Join us for this amazing conversation with Lynne. Lynne is a retired attorney with over 21 years of experience whose career ended due to a stress-related breakdown. She turned to mind, body, spirit for recovery, and that led her to her spiritual awakening. She now lives filled with joy and wonder. Lynne feels called to help others on the path to self-recovery and is also offering donation-based services so she can help share her knowledge and help others regain their sense of being present in their lives. You can reach Lynne at freeyourselfromburnout.com. Welcome, Lynne. So glad to have you join us today.
Hello.
So I'm looking forward to this conversation, and what you're doing is amazing, and it's going to, I feel like, help many people because we all go through stressful situations, not just at home, but in the workplace. And that part of that and becoming aware of that is really important so we don't have like a stress breakdown. Now, I myself have had a few, so I can kind of understand and relate. One of them actually was added to my near-death experience, which was what helped bring that on, let alone a lot of different situations. Also, I've had an experience of a stress break at a high-stress sales job where you're constantly got to keep going all day long for like your full work week. So it's a heavy load, just to kind of keep going and pushing. So it can bring you that. And I noticed that I was not feeling good mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually from that. And it was making me sick. Like I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to do it anymore. It was just kind of like bringing me down. So I know it's important to become aware of those signs. So I know we've had interactions before, and I know that you talked about the stress break. And yours came from what I know of from being in the attorney role. And can you share with us a little bit? We'll start with the background. Can you share a little bit of why you went into that career?
Well, I went into it in I went to law school from 1978 to 1981. And at the time, didn't know anything about spirituality. I was just very material. And it was just when I was a kid, I wanted to be a politician. And I thought that to be a politician, I would have to be an attorney. And I changed my mind about the politician stuff, but I just always wanted to be an attorney. I didn't really think about doing anything else. So I just went to law school without really thinking about whether there was anything else I could do. And I graduated in 1981 and I became an attorney.
Awesome. So, now were you like independent or did you work with other people or what was your setup?
Well, in the 80s and um, early 90s, I worked for a couple of law firms and a series of things happened and none of those jobs ever lasted. We were in Los Angeles, my husband and I at the time, and I had a couple of jobs in Los Angeles and things went wrong. I kind of sabotaged those jobs, I think, because I didn't really want them. So after we moved to where we are now, I started practicing on my own. I went into the appeals field where, someone loses a court case and they want to appeal it to a higher court. So I started doing mostly that in the mid 80s. And I did criminal defense appeals. I represented criminal defendants. I took a couple of years off in the 90s, and in the early 2000s, I decided I wanted to prosecute criminal appeals. So I started working for a prosecuting agency from the summer of 2002 until I left in February of 2025.
That sounds like it's very intense for to hear those cases and whatnot. So it must have been hard, with that there. Now, like, were there any times where you had to do a case that you didn't want to do?
As a criminal defense attorney, it got difficult. And again, I was not knew nothing about spirituality when I started as a criminal defense attorney. It was difficult at that time because as I got the more difficult cases, the crimes became more severe. And so representing someone who had committed a severe crime was very difficult. I would not interact as much with clients as much as trial lawyers, but there would be interaction on paper, and they would write constantly, and I got threatening letters from criminal defendants, and that made it very difficult. The other thing that was difficult was that their appeals usually had no merit to them. The trial was done properly, and I usually did not prevail in those appeals, the defendant. And so they would write to me saying, well, you should do it this way. And they would get angry because I was doing it the way we needed to do it under the law. And they were writing angry letters. And so that got very, very difficult by about early 2000 or 2001.
Oh, wow, I can understand that because that's a lot of pressure. And, to try and do the right thing in a place where they don't want you to do it can be very stressful, for sure. Did you notice how that was affecting you, like mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually at the time? Did you pick
Well,
up
the
those?
the criminal defense didn't affect me. When we get into spirituality, I'll talk to you about what happened with that. Um, but the prosecuting agency, I had dropped spirituality, and we can get into that when you ask about it. And I basically worked myself too hard to try to please the organization and, try to get approval. And at first I loved it, but I just kept working harder and harder. And what ended up happening with the stress is that I just did nothing with work. That was all I did. And I dropped everything else I was doing. And in 2020, the COVID pandemic came and the office shut down. We all had to leave, and we had to work from our houses. By then, all my friends were at work. I had dropped all my other friends for work, and now we were isolated, and it got more and more isolating. And other things happened, which we can talk about later. But it got isolating, and the office never reopened. They decided we're better off remote. So over time between that and just stressing myself out, by the end of 2023, I'd pretty much had it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of companies that a lot of them came to that conclusion. It's better just to work from home. So it may have been a little bit more of an ease from you than being in person, but still the stress was there, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we couldn't talk to each other. Instead of just going into each other's offices and just talking, you had to text someone and say, can I talk to you on the phone now? And there was just, my husband was telecommuting on and off, but the people, we were just so isolated.
So that kind of sounds like that was what kind of brought you to your stress break.
Yeah, over time between that and just it's constant, driving for approval and, thinking I wasn't good enough, and I somehow had to get people to like me by doing everybody's work and volunteering for every assignment. I was working over the weekends. I was working at night. All I did was work, basically.
Now, did you notice kind of like if any feelings in your body or anything like that from it, how it was affecting you?
Not at first. It was mostly mental because I was trying to seek approval from the outside world. And, I'd get someone saying, good job, and the approval from that would, the high from that would last about 5 minutes. And then I'd go back to I'm not good enough with mental talk. And then I'd have to do something else to get approval. So I wasn't really happy. I had other issues, which I can talk about if you want, with internal struggles. By 2020, I started noticing it in my body. I was depressed. People started saying, you don't seem the same. You don't seem to be enjoying this anymore. But I just kept driving and striving and just ignored it until there because of a set of circumstances. And if we have time and you want to hear, I can tell you, but set of circumstances happened that caused me to wake up one morning in December 2023, and I looked at the work and I'm like, I don't understand this work. I I was frozen. I was so depressed and anxious, I couldn't do it. They started presenting in 2020, but I ignored it.
And I think a lot of us try to ignore it and, put it down, press it down, and ignore it. And kind of it becomes like probably heightened and worse. We can have outbursts and things like that, and kind of just goes down a rabbit hole. Now, on your website, I love the website because I did check it out. It goes over mind, body, soul, or not mind, body, spirit, I should say. So kind of want to dive into that. Let's start with the body. So for me, in my background, I have nutrition. And so they do go over part of dietetics and what goes in the body, how it functions and all of that. Now, from my understanding, it's not just food, but it's our emotions, our thoughts, medications, everything affects the body. Now, with medications, they also do have adverse reactions and effects. And from my counseling and nutrition, I've seen that it's not it's not an end-all healing system. It's only a band-aid to help us to get and cope through our situation until we can heal it. So it's there to help, but it's not our healing. We have to go deeper and dive in and do the work. And a lot of people don't do that. And so they're on the medicine and they give that power over to doctors and things like that, and they end up still being sick. So can you share about your experience, with the body and how that relates to you and the medications, if you've had any of those, and what was your journey with them?
Well, I had been on antidepressants / anti-anxiety medications for years since, and I can tell you my spiritual story when we get to it, but I had been on them since 1986. And I still take them. I'm not ready to get off of them yet, but I had been on them since 1986. I was seeing a therapist, but she wasn't giving me any therapy. We just chewed the fat or whatever. So I was taking them for a number of years until from 1986 on, and that was all I was doing. And for me, and then in March 2023, that was part of the problem. One of them just stopped working because I had been taking it for so many years. But I quickly learned, when we get to the mind, I'll talk about it, is that they are a band-aid. They may be a necessary band-aid. Like, I'm not ready to see what happens if I don't take them. I'm not at that point yet, but they don't solve the mental and spiritual problems that we have, and that we have to address everything. Now, also with the body, I try to watch what I eat. I'm not that good at it. I admit that, but I try not to eat sugar and things like that. One thing that I never dropped is, since I've been about 17, I've done regular exercise. Like, I do between 45 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes, 6 days a week. And I also do gentle yoga. So I've always been an exerciser. And I'm really grateful for that, because even when I was anxious and depressed and had broken down, I had to slow it down, but I kept exercising, and that's been very important for me.
Yeah, exercising is definitely important. It helps loosen up the body. In fact, one of my emotional releases came when I was doing yoga, because it gets into the body if we don't work through our situations and our thoughts and our beliefs and our stresses, things like that. It gets stuck and lodged in the body. And it's when I had done yoga, it was able to shift. And then I went into this deep release of emotions. So it's very helpful to be doing exercise, doing yoga, doing a lot of different things for the body to help it stay healthy, because it's an intelligence system. And I don't think a lot of people understand that everything's stored within the body.
Yeah, I do gentle hatha. I don't do the because I do other exercise, I don't do the vigorous yoga. I just,
Mhm.
but it's good for the body and the mind and spirit. I mean, that kind of yoga is good for everything for me.
Yep, I was doing Vinyasa yoga, and the lady had actually just came from India, and she was passing through, and I got to take one of her courses, and she had a really great way of doing it. Like the lights were low. She really put you in that spiritual calm state. And Vinyasa was, it wasn't like vigorous, it was very slow motion. You were able to go into that space. And I think that helped with that. So I had a big shift and transformation through that. So definitely. Now with the mind, so I also mentioned I've done counseling, and so it's really important to get our mind right, our thoughts, and part of that for me was meditation. And so that was one of the first things that actually showed up after my near-death experience, because after that I was led onto a path, and that was the one thing that spirit brought in for me was meditation. So I went on the meditation journey and been meditating ever since. So how does that play out for you as one of your tools and methods?
Well, I started doing meditation last year sometime. I'm still working on clearing the monkey mind, and I got a good suggestion from somebody. This is the suggestion that's worked most for me with the monkey mind. It's getting better and better, but he said to just every time I have a thought to say, that's an interesting thought and let it move along. But I do regular meditation right now. What I'm doing, because it's worked best for me, is I have like a meditation music, a frequency music, and I just put that on and start breathing and do his. That's an interesting thought, and that's worked best for me. I occasionally I'll get like a profound spiritual experience during a meditation. I often feel connected to spirit. I don't, but even if nothing happens, I know it's really benefiting me. The other thing with the mind and me, and a little of it's on my website, is that, and this is all, for this, there's spiritual reasons for my soul choices, but I didn't know that when as I was growing up. And so grew up as being told that there was something wrong with me, that I was defective in some way. I was mentally ill, which was not true. And so I grew up, with no self-esteem whatsoever. I hated myself, and because I hated myself, kids would bully me, and it was just a cycle. And the reason I'm mentioning this is when I had the breakdown, I got into what's called the cognitive behavioral program. And for the first time, I was taught that anxiety and depression aren't all chemical, that there are thinking patterns that start the anxiety and depression going. And usually the core of those is I'm not good enough. And then it goes racing on from there, like, and I'm not good enough and expecting the worst. And that the minute I had some of those thoughts, it went racing into anxiety and depression. So they taught us things like keeping thought records and watching your thoughts and affirmations and things like that. And that was an invaluable program, because I couldn't start anything with spirituality until I cleared out some of the thoughts, because it's almost impossible to do a spiritual path while thinking I'm worthless, I'm not good enough. So, and then after that, so I did that for 3 months. I took 3 months off on disability after I had the breakdown, and I did that program. It was 3 days a week for several hours. And they put me, the head of the program, got me together with this beautiful, wonderful therapist who is very spiritual, and she also does cognitive work. She does everything, and I still see her once a week. So I continue with all of that, and that was just invaluable to continuing forward. And in fact, I have a notebook of the lessons they gave, and I still read one of them each morning and as part of my reading, because I don't want to forget that. It's so easy to fall into those thinking patterns.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it is very powerful because and it is true. I knew for me anyway, in my experience, because like my spirituality didn't come until my awakening, my near-death experience and the meditation, and because when we have those negative thoughts, it's actually a barrier between the spirituality when we can't get through there, right? We can't connect if we're saying that about ourselves and listening to the thoughts, believing the thoughts, wherever they came from, which would helped me because I went through counseling and got my master's degree in it. So I kind of understand it from that because I was able to do it and help other people with it. But yeah, you can tune into the spirituality if you have all this going on in your thoughts and your mind. It's like a barrier, and a lot of us don't realize it. And the meditation helps slow that down, so we can open that opening, and let some of it come in and start going in that direction.
Yeah, I couldn't even do meditation until I cleared up some of this thinking. It was during the program toward the end of when I was there that they actually suggested to us that we start meditating. I started with
Mhm.
like 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's a practice. I know it took me a while, and then with meditation, so it was probably be I'd say about around 6 months maybe in meditation where I was only able to do like 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden there was this break, and I pushed myself because I felt like this barrier. And so I pushed myself through that barrier. I was like, nope, I'm going to sit here some more. It was almost like my mind or my body was like in resistance. And once I did that, I meditated for like an hour and a half and I came back and I was like, wow, what happened? So that was like one of the big spiritual experiences I had through meditation, a breakthrough, and kind of helped me on the journey. But yeah, the minds, it's like a replay from what I understand of things that we've picked up throughout our journey, from other people, and we've either accepted it or it's still lingering there and we can
Yeah.
see it. And sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes, unless we try to meditate and watch the mind, and then we can become aware. Because I know people that I've counseled said, like, I don't know why I have anxiety. I'm not having any thoughts, because thoughts lead to anxiety after a while. It creates the stress, the relation, and it ends up with anxiety from thoughts. But they're saying, well, I don't have thoughts. I'm like, well, what are you thinking now? Because they're not taking the time to think the thoughts, if that makes sense. You have to become aware of the thoughts that's leading to your anxiety, right? Otherwise, you're not going to know what's causing it. And then you have to try to watch the minds, which comes in when I took Buddhism. So I learned through Buddhism, you have to watch the mind. Even if you're not meditating, just sit and watch the minds, and then you can see. So it was
Yeah,
very interesting.
that's what they did. They would have us every time we got anxious and depressed, they'd have us do a thought record and say and try to figure out what we were thinking. What thought popped into your head that led to that anxiety, because the thought always precedes the anxiety or depression. It's either with anxiety, it's a fear about the future, and with depression, it's a regret about the past.
Hmm. Yeah, and then being in tune to our emotions helps because it's our navigation system. So I've learned that when I have a thought about the future, like I can realize and recognize some worry, some stress, some anxiety, some fear come in. And I'm like, okay, let's not think that thought, right? Let's change the thought. So it's just a practice of, once you become aware of your thoughts, is changing your thought process. So it's like a sign that you're going in the wrong direction with your thought, because the future hasn't happened yet. And if you're worried about, you're creating it, manifesting, which kind of is spiritual, right? And so we kind of want to be able to navigate and watch our mind, our thoughts, and what we're projecting and putting out into the world, because we're going to experience it, because we're going to create it and manifest it.
Yeah, that was my problem since my and I did a forgiveness exercise with my mother, who's now 97 with dementia. I did a forgiveness exercise with her about a year ago, which was beautiful. But all growing up, she was like, I have two brothers, and she was like convinced herself that the whole family dysfunction was because there was something wrong with me. She was like, there's something wrong with me, and that's why this whole family isn't functioning. So I got that message, and because I got that message, I went to school when I was a kid, and I was afraid of other kids, and I was sensitive anyway, and I kind of stayed away from them. So they started bullying me, and then I get that message even more. So it's kind of an endless thing until you change the thinking pattern. It feeds on itself, because if you think you're not good enough, you're going to behave like you're not good enough.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And a lot of us aren't taught that, we're not educated, which I think should be part of our schooling or education and how to exist and be in the world. So hopefully at some point, they'll change it, whether we teach it at home or in school or whatever the case may be. Um, so I kind of want to go into the spirit side now, because we kind of did touch on like manifesting, going into that and watching our minds and things like that. So I'm not religious by any means, but I have tried different ones, and none of them resonated. Buddhism was the one that really caught my attention because it wasn't really religious, but it held some great teachings in it. So I kind of studied that for a while. And that helped me on my path because I was studying Buddhism for about 5 years and had the ability to really get into my meditation practice and get into samadhi. So it was really a deep process for me. So with that, it helped with understanding like the dissolving of the ego, shedding of the identity and things like that, which you actually have on your website, which I looked and I love it. You stated being an attorney is not my identity. It's something I do. And a lot of people attach to their identity. This is who I am, and what am I without it if I'm not this, which was also part of Buddhism teaching, right? It's learning to be in the world without being of the world, right? Not attachment. And when we can do that, we can have the more free flowing lives, and interacting from that place without being caught up in it and having, stressful lives and things like that. So I love that you have that on your website. Did you want to share a little bit about spirituality, about your experience and what you're doing with that?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, so stop me if it's getting too long.
Okay.
But um, my parents were atheists. They didn't believe in God or anything, and they were more than just atheists. They pretty much taught us that if you believed in anything, you were stupid, ignorant, or insane. So like, they make, and they did that with politics too. It was everything. If you didn't think their way, you were stupid. So they did not, our heritage is Jewish, but they told us, they didn't allow us to have any religious education because it was stupid. So as kids, we're like, okay, they're our parents. So they also, along with that, of course, was this is what you see is what you get. You die and that's it, and have fun. And the third thing was the world is a dangerous place, because I'm a lot older than you are, and I grew up during the Vietnam War, and all we had was war footage on there and bomb drills in the schools. And so the world was a scary place for me growing up. And I used to have panic attacks on and off I'd think about death, and I'd have these panic attacks. So when I got married, and I was 22 when I got married, so that's all I heard about death. It's the end. I never heard any alternative. So when I got married at 22, and my husband's like, he's agnostic. He doesn't know he doesn't know. He doesn't study it. So when I got married at 22, we went to visit his family in Florida. And somehow religion came up, and the fact that my background is Jewish. And my sister-in-law, his sister, asked me if I had a certain religious philosophy and belief system. And I said, no, we're Jewish. And she told me, well, you're going to fry in hell for all eternity. And I got in this, because I was 22, I got in this big argument with her, and it did not go over well. And I'm like, I don't like what my parents have to say. I don't like what she had to say. So I dropped the whole thing. I'm like, I'm not even going to think about any of this anymore. and so I became very materialistic and I just like shoved it away. About 8 years later, on my 30th birthday, I was driving to work and somehow the death thought came back. It just like struck me with a vengeance. I'm going to die someday. And I was on the freeway and I lost consciousness and I went careening off to the other side of the freeway and hit the median divide. And from what I now know as divine intervention, I was not hurt. The other drivers were not hurt. My car was hurt. So you'd think that would wake me up, but I spent over 6 years, feeling sorry for myself. I was unhappy. I was working sort of. I mean, I was in bed feeling sorry for myself. That was 1986, in the summer of 1992. And I recognize all this now as part of my soul's plan and journey, but not in the 80s and 90s. An event happened where I said to myself, I am tired of feeling this way. So it prompted me to go to a 12-step program, adult children of alcoholics, because my dad drank. He was a functioning alcoholic. So I said, I want spirituality. I need this. So I went to that and I started looking into that. And I made a friend there and I told her I was terrified of death. That was the first person I had ever told about my fear. And she asked me, well, what do you think death is? And I said, here's what my parents told me, and here's what my sister-in-law told me. I said, both of these stink. And she said, well, those aren't the only alternatives. I said, they're not. So she said, I have a book I want you to read. And she gave me Raymond Moody's Life After Life about near-death experiences. And she said, I'm going to give you this book. And I still have the copy she gave me. She said, read this. And I read it and I was like amazed. I had never heard of any of this. And it started to give me a lot of hope. So I grabbed every book I could find on anything to do with this and anything to do with spirituality at all that, wasn't telling me I was going to hell. So reading this, I came upon other books, about reincarnation. And I was like, makes sense. Nothing else makes sense to me, but this really makes sense. So in 1994, I was sitting in the spiritual center I was attending at the time. And it was after the service. And it was a spiritual center that taught that God is love. And, it didn't teach hell. It just, God is love and we're all divine. And I was sitting in the back of their spiritual center. And all of a sudden I felt this, because I was still questioning God because I could hear my mother chirping in my background, in my head. And I felt this like overwhelming presence of unconditional love. And I said, now I know what God is. And all the chirpings in my head stopped. And 3 years later, and I was still reading the books. And 3 years later, a book like jumped out at me. I think I got it at one of the spiritual centers, and it was called Journey of Souls by Michael Newton. And it was about the soul's life between lives. He had regressed people, and he discovered this by accident. He had regressed people to their soul state, not just past life regression, but to the spirit world, the life between lives. And I started reading this and I started underlining everything. Like, I remember this, I remember this, I know this. The following year, 1998, I had a bunch of visions and dreams about past lives, future lives. And in one of them in April, I was sitting or standing or something, and I saw a figure behind me in the dream. And I said, "Who are you?" Kind of like, telepathically. And the figure gave me a name and said, "I'm your spirit guide." And I was like, not surprised. I had a memory, and I said, "Oh, this is wow." And this guide showed me some things, and that's going to be too long a story if I talk about what that is, but they were amazing things. And I woke up kind of amazed, and I thought I wanted to know more about it. And I live in California, and I knew Michael Newton lived in California, and that you could write away to his publishing company and maybe get to see him for one of these regressions. He was still doing them in the 90s. I wrote away, and it took 3 years, but I got to see him at his home in Grass Valley, California in May of 2001. The session was recorded. At the very end of this session, I got one was in the middle and one at the end. The message, we were talking about the guide, and Michael Newton said to me, "You don't have to wait for dreams to ask for guidance. You can ask him anytime." The second message at the very end that my soul told me was that I needed to learn to love myself unconditionally, or I was never going to make any progress. And I had never heard the concept of unconditional love as a human being. The whole time I was studying the spirituality and having these experiences, I was still hating myself. I was hating myself. I was unhappy. I went trying to prove myself in the spiritual community, trying to become somebody in the spiritual community, because I was filled with self-hatred, and nothing had changed in the mind. So I decided that in the midst of studying spirituality for 10 years, I decided, I know what will make me happy. I'll go work for a prosecuting agency. I don't like defense work. This will make me happy. So I went to work for the prosecuting agency in 2002, immediately dropped all the spirituality because I wanted to prove myself at work, just dropped it all. Put the recording of Michael Newton somewhere and just dropped it all, and did nothing but work. Told nobody about anything I was doing. In fact, I never told anybody I saw Michael Newton until I told my therapist in the spring of 2024. So I didn't tell anybody for 23 years, even my husband. Dropped it all, forgot about it all. It took away my fear of death, but other than that, I just dropped it. And so years and years go by, and I'm dropping this, and I'm heading for this breakdown. So I go to this intensive care program, and I had dropped it. And because people are in the intensive care program, they're depressed. And as I started coming out of the depression and anxiety, and I see in the intensive care program, I'm picking up on other people's depression, and I'm feeling incomplete, even though I'm getting better. So what I found out later was a spark lit by my entire spirit team. It came to me, you've got to do the spirituality again, and you've got to practice it this time. Now your mind is clear. You've got to practice it, not just, stick it in a drawer somewhere and practice it. You got to practice it. You got to really walk the walk. So what ended up happening was I dug up the recording of the session with Michael Newton, and I reread his books. And this time because I had listened to it in 2001, and I had somehow missed those messages. And I heard the unconditional self-love message for the first time. I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd heard this in 2001. So as soon as I heard that message, things started to change. The transformation began. I started to feel, the connections. A major thing I did was I started to ask my guide for guidance where I hadn't done that, even though he said I could. And I started to ask for guidance, and I started to get the guidance. I went back to the spiritual center. I started making friends. I returned to work for actually 9 months in May of 2024, but I worked part-time and I didn't take on any of the stress. So I went back to work part-time, and I went to a spiritual center, and I started, instead of reading, I started practicing. I started meditating. I started to say good things to myself, and just to change. It's the changes started just by listening to that over again and really hearing what I had to say, what was said to me in that session. I thought I would, I thought, okay, this transformation is to continue. In August, I thought to myself, August of 2024, I thought to myself, gosh, Michael Newton was 70 when he saw me in 2001. It's now 2024, do the math. He's probably not still with us. And I just assumed that he saw about 7,000 people between 1968 and 2002. I was very blessed to have seen him. I assume that he wrote these books, he saw these 7,000 people, and that was very interesting, and that was the end of the whole thing. But I wanted to look him up and see, when he passed, what happened. He passed in 2016, but to my shock, before he passed, he started training people to do these types of regressions. And when I looked him up, there were over 200 facilitators who were doing these around the world, that the work had spread, and over 70,000 people now had these sessions. So I went to the website, the Newton Institute website, and went on some of their Facebook groups and started posting that I'd seen Michael Newton. In November of 2024, one of the facilitators in training posted something. He said, well, if you ever decide to have another soul journey through life between lives, compare the recordings, because it's really changed since 2001. And then I was given the message, you've got to do this again. I had no intention of doing it again. I had done it. I didn't think I'd get any more after 2001. And at that moment, it was like, do this again. So there were no facilitators where I live. The closest was in Los Angeles, which is about 2 hours away, and you can do it by Zoom. So, but I didn't want to do Zoom after not doing it for 23 years. So through a series of synchronicities, I found the perfect facilitator in Los Angeles. I drove up to Los Angeles on December 2nd, and I had a session with him, and it was absolutely incredible. It went much beyond what happened in 2001, which was pretty rudimentary. It was amazing, and it just went into so many more things than the format they used in 2001, because this facilitator is so good that he just takes you wherever you go. He doesn't follow the format. I found out a lot about my soul plans. I also found out about my purpose and things like that. Unconditional self-love, which was still, and unconditional love was still part of my purpose. And I just saw some amazing things in the spirit world, went to the Akashic records, saw my soul's book and things like that. Part of my purpose that I got was to help in some small way with the spiritual awakening of the planet. So the way he worked is he would channel. He didn't say, talk to your guide and tell me what your guide says. He had you channel the guides, which is a lot more effective. And after he channeled the guides, he channeled what we call the counselor ascended masters. And he channeled the lead, the one who communicates for my counsel, and talked about this purpose. And at that time, I was like, well, I can't really do that working for the agency I'm working for. It's just a bunch of, keeping criminals in jail, which didn't feel very good anymore. So the topic came up of, well, when would I leave my work to devote myself full time to this purpose? And what the council said is, keep doing what I'm doing for now. Don't be afraid to tell people about my spiritual path, because I'm still a little terrified to talk about it. I kept it in for so long because every time I thought about talking about it, I would be like, what if they ridicule me before, like the way my mom did, my dad did? Because I was still cared what people thought. Now I don't really, but I cared what people thought, so I didn't talk about it even after I started back on, and I didn't tell anybody anything. So they said, keep doing what I'm doing. Don't be afraid to share. Start sharing. Use discernment, but share, because who are you going to help if you don't share? Then the key thing they said was, and when it's time for her to leave her current work and devote herself to this full time, we will tell her. I did not get an answer as to what I was going to do or when I was going to do it. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep working where I'm working for now and try not to be so afraid to talk. And I know this is a really long story. It's almost over. Six weeks later, and where the kind of law I was working in at the time, because of my area of specialty, I did not have to look at the gruesome facts of any of the cases. I was functioning on a legal issue, and that was my area of expertise, and it was very safe, and I didn't have to look at any gruesome facts. 6 weeks later, I got a case back to me that I had worked on 2 or 3 years earlier, because it was going to be a court appearance, and I had to devote myself, all my working hours to this case, the 20 hours a week, because I had to get ready for this important court appearance. And I had not looked at this case in 3 years. It was probably the most horrific crime I've ever seen in my time at that office. And I'm not going to talk about it except to say it was horrific. About 2 days after I started looking at it, I got physically ill. My stomach hurt when I looked at it. So I actually went back to the council in meditation, and I said, I remember you telling me you will tell me when it's time to leave. I said, this case is making me physically ill. If there's something else, if I'm supposed to still be doing this, despite the fact that I'm ill, please tell me. But if there's something else for me to do, please tell me, because I'm not feeling good about working on this. Within 2 hours, literally, it just came to me. Drop the work as soon as this case is over, and start doing something where you're helping people who have stress-related problems. So I got through the case, and the court appearance went really perfectly. I got through the case, and then I started working on that website. And through, more synchronicities, the perfect marketer came to me, and just everything started working out perfectly. And 2 years ago, I thought I panicked at the thought of retiring, because I thought I'll have nothing to do, and I can't tell you how great it was to leave. It's wonderful. The website has taken months, and I haven't really marketed it. It hasn't really taken off as far as people contacting me. And when I ask them about that, they tell me things like, don't measure it by how many people contact you, because it's reaching more people than you think. It's self-explanatory, and people will see it and they'll know what to do without contacting you. I'm being too limited. And for all I know, it's going to be the business model in 20 years. Just don't measure it. And the interesting thing about that is I'm trusting it. It's like I'm trusting what, and more things have come to me since then. In I've had, it's constant synchronicities. I mean, and not everything has gone well. There's been some real there was a real tragedy in January, which I can mention later, but in March, I was doing a meditation and I had this amazing experience where welling up deep from my soul were the words, I am magnificent. I am a part of God. I am magnificent. And like the remaining self-esteem issues just vanished. For the first time ever, I obsessed about three things: death, aging, and food. My whole life, all of that is gone. I don't have any fears. I don't worry. I'm not afraid. I can dislike something that's in the world, but I'm not afraid of it. I've since then they've guided me to write a book, which I resisted several times. I ended up seeing my Life Between Lives facilitator again in May, because at my request, he came down to our city to see people who didn't want to drive to Los Angeles. It was even more amazing and longer than the one in December. I found out all about my soul planning, how I ended up being here on Earth, how I ended up with this particular family, how, and I found out things in these sessions that went beyond my own life, like things about, Jesus came up, something came up about the watchers of the planets. Things came up that were well beyond anything that I'm experiencing. It was just, I can't even tell you how amazing it is. I mean, it's amazing enough just to have the experience of remembering yourself as a free soul and being in the spirit world. But the knowledge I got, I mean, and I have no doubt. I mean, I don't say I believe that I'm an eternal soul. I say I know I'm an eternal soul. I know it. And people, I don't need a scientific experiment to tell me. I can have these experiences tell me, my constant spiritual connection tell me. I'm I get out of disconnection sometimes, things happen, but I feel connected with spirit. I'm not a visual person yet, but I am so connected to spirit. I can feel it. I get guidance. I went to the same spiritual center I'd gone to since in the 90s for about a year or so. But even that didn't serve my soul growth. So I switched to, and I'm not advertising anything, this is for me, but through a set of synchronicities, I found spiritualism, which endorses the same principles, and I'm loving it there, and I'm getting more spiritual exposure there and getting more spiritual experiences. And the fact that I'm without fear, and that I say in groups, I see death as magical and I see life as magical. And I also, like I've said before in groups, I feel like a kid in a candy shop, because there's always something new. I mean, it's really amazing. And I tell my story because I'm hoping it helps others, that whether they're stressed out or not, or just simply want to understand that there's more. And I can't say my path is for everybody, but I can say that there's a lot of ways to get the spiritual connection. But if people are searching for a way, their spiritual regression for me was an excellent way of doing it. I hear people say, I wish I like had a heart attack so I could have a near death experience. I've never had a near-death experience, so I can't compare the two. I don't know. But I know that spiritual regression and even past life regression are one ways of getting of growing spiritually without having to, be hit by a truck and almost dying. So I'm so very grateful to have, for Michael Newton and for the person who gave me that book about near-death experiences, because, and I don't remember her name, but I'm so grateful that we have these avenues and meditation and various other avenues of having these experiences, because it's changed everything for me.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, it sounds like you've had a really interesting journey there with all that. So kind of some things I want to kind of touch on with that. Yeah, I understand we don't really necessarily have to have a near-death experience in order to have spiritual awakening and wake up. I mean, it's helpful because it's a whole different experience, but a lot of people wake up without having the near-death experience, and they get the same benefits out of it. Everybody's journey is going to be different, and what they chose um, what is going to be part of our path, which kind of want to go back. Now, I know you were saying in the beginning with the Jewish culture. So some cultures, and for some reason this came up, and I just kind of touch on it because it's something that I want to kind of get an answer to. Some cultures tend to look more at the male than the female because they want, for whatever reason, they want to have male children. And so they don't really look at them as the same. Do you think that plays out with the Jewish cultures, or is that not part of it?
Honestly, I didn't learn a lot about the Jewish culture because, it was prohibited. And then I married at 22 and my husband's Presbyterian, so I didn't learn a whole lot about it. But what little I did learn, and I don't know what it's like today, is there was some emphasis on the male, because at 13 they have what's called a bar mitzvah, which is the male coming into his own. And they started having a bat mitzvah for 13-year-old girls. We never went through this, but it wasn't the same as the bar mitzvah. I know even more than the New Testament, throughout the Old Testament and the Bible, it's always about the patriarchy. I mean, there are a few women like Ruth, but from what I remember, it's mostly about the patriarchy. And so I believe it grew up as a patriarchy. If I look at Israel today, and I know there's a lot of strife in Israel and in the Middle East, but I don't see a lot of women coming forward there. I see the leaders as being mostly men. So and it probably depends upon what type of Judaism, because there's Orthodox, there's Reform, there's moderate. So it probably depends a lot on what branch of Judaism.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if that was what part of the play, because I like when our parents and their parents, they kind of pass that down through generations, where they can project it onto our children, and that's where we kind of pick up things like that. And I'm wondering if that was part of what, was your experience, even though maybe it wasn't really intended, it's just part of the culture that they were in that played out for you to have you feel like you weren't good enough, or those things. And maybe it was just through the culture generation patterns that you receive those thoughts, if it was part of that culture. Because a lot of times, it may not even be that our parents tell us it, but we can feel and we can sense it and we can tune it because it's ingrained into the body, the system. And when we take up that form of when we come in as a soul into the body, it's already there. It's already written. Everything's already there for us when we come in. So we may be tapping into that. And those are thoughts that arise within ourselves. And we may not even know where they come from, but that's where they come from because it's already in the body that we chose.
Well, I can say no, I agree. I mean, I agree. I can say three things about that. There was some of that. My mother, I know when I grew up in the 60s in elementary school, in the 60s, girls were treated as second class citizens. I mean, we had to wear skirts and I doubt they do this today. We don't have any children, but girls had to say, take sewing and cooking, and guys got to take mechanics and auto shop, which seemed a lot more interesting to me. We played girls basketball, so girls, had to, like, you couldn't cross the basketball court. You had to be a guard or a forward. There were no girls sports. My brothers grew up track and cross country, but there was nothing for girls. They did not have girls, sports at all. When I was a little older, I think I was on a girls softball team or something, but they did not have girls sports. Even when I started law in the early 80s, I had one court appearance I'll never forget, because I was 26 and the judge and my opponent treated me like a stupid little girl. I looked like a kid. The second thing about that is that it was definitely a not good enough message, because when I was, and I'm writing about this in my book now, and it's rather painful, is that I had some spirituality as a small child, and partly because of that, and partly because I acted out. My mother actually sent me to see a psychiatrist when I was about 4 years old. She decided I had a screw loose, to be blunt, and she sent me to a child psychiatrist. And I was smart enough to know what a psychiatrist was, and I'm like, that really gave me a message. And it especially gave me a message because my middle brother had psychiatric problems. I mean, we all did. And his problem was he was a headbanger. He would bang his head repeatedly against a wall for no reason. And I didn't understand as a small child why I got the psychiatrist and why he could bang his head and he never got sent to a psychiatrist. The other thing from a spiritual perspective that I learned through the regressions is that I had chosen this experience. My soul had chosen this experience of being different, being, feeling less than, and that my mother had, even before birth, my mother had convinced herself, because she didn't really want children. She waited 10 years to have children, and I learned this through the regression. She denied it, but I know it to be true, that even when I was a tiny baby in the womb, she was so afraid of having children that she convinced herself that this baby was going to be defective. There was going to be something was not going to go right. So even before I was born, she was convinced there was going to be something wrong with this baby. So she came in with that mindset that there was going to be something wrong. So of course it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what she told me was, and she told me this, I don't remember it. She said she became convinced I was defective or that I was not right when I was 2 years old. And I crawled around the park and I put like things in my mouth, because babies don't usually put things in their mouths, which is not true at all. Babies do that. But she said that's what did it for her. That convinced her, that she was correct, that there was something wrong with me. And after that, it was constant, there's something wrong with me. She sent me to a series of psychiatrists and psychologists, and it was just a rapidly deteriorating situation in the home.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've understood through some studies that also we ingrain, kind of like what you're saying, we get ingrained in the womb in our projection, so we are being integrated into the womb as well. So we're creating and manifesting that as an outcome. Now I know from my own regression, because I did have a few, and I'm trained in soul regression therapy. And it's actually called introspective hypnosis, but I changed the name for soul regression because that's kind of how I feel more about naming it. But very similar to past life regressions, you can go into different places. So I went into the womb, and I can feel everything that was going on. And, my mother didn't want me as well, not well. I don't know if you said yours was more of the fear of having, but mine was like, she didn't want me. And I kind of knew that. I grew that up with that distance from my parents. And that's kind of where it came from, because I felt it, I heard her, I can sense it. and it didn't feel good, because I literally had experienced that. And that kind of brings me to like the whole regression process, which we can dive into all these different aspects, our past lives, our in the womb, our future lives, and because it's all kind of like also connecting the Akashic records. So it's all written there, everything that we've chosen, everything that we're planning out, and what's going to be the experience, where we're going, and we can tap in anytime that we want. Now, I also learned about a lot of my past lives, which played out into this life. So it's like intermingling, and you can always tap into that information from past lives if you need to draw on the information or knowledge or skill, which I've done, and I didn't realize I was doing it. And then also I've had past lives that were still lingering, that weren't closed, officially done in this life, because I needed to use those skills in this life. And then when I could do it, they were then done. And I can close a chapter on those lives and then just live from a new place, right? So I think they're all helpful. And I think a lot of people were like afraid of actually knowing about their past lives because it's bad or it's evil or it doesn't exist. But it's helpful for me. Like in my eyes, it's helpful because we need to know this information. We need to know it's there and it's valuable and we can use it to our benefit, not our detriment, if that makes sense. So it's like an unfolding, ongoing continuum in my eyes. So how do you see that in your experience?
Well, I agree that the spiritual, or what they call life between lives, or LBL regression, they always go through the womb regression first. That what they do is they have you go on a staircase, however old you are, they count down on the staircase, and then when they get to a year, they go month by month, and then they take you to the womb, and they talk to you about what does it feel like in the womb, um, what is, when does your soul come, what does that feel like, and they do a lot of womb regression in that those sessions, and that's how I found out about my mother's anxiety, and how she didn't want a baby either. She thought she should have a baby because in the 50s you're supposed to have babies. I mean, she did not want any children. I found that out too. And then they also they'll usually they go in the spirit world through a past life, and that session they didn't do it with me because I was there through another, I got there on my own, but I've had a couple of like straight past life regressions, but during my December life between lives session, the facilitator, his name is Scott, he asked me to go to the origin of the not good enough. Was there another life that there was an origin that originated from? And it went back to my very first life or incarnation. And I was not even a human. It was before human beings were human beings. They were like ape-like creatures. And he asked me what happened. And I said, well, I'm this ape-like creature, female with a male, and we're alone. If there are others, they're not nearby. And women in this society are inferior, you know. And I was with a man, and the man, the male or whatever, we were somehow connected, like paired up or something. And the male was upset with me because I was a female and I was not, couldn't help him with the hunting and gathering or whatever. And he started beating me on the head with a club until basically I perished, and that was the origin of the not good enough, which I thought was fascinating. I'm like, and then Scott said, "Isn't it time to let that go?" And it was pretty amusing. But I also learned, though, that I had chosen to be different, quote unquote, in this life, and have these experiences, because the only way to truly learn unconditional self-love was to experience its opposite. that if I had this great loving family and was this popular kid with all these friends, then it wouldn't be unconditional. I would still be getting it from other people this whole life. And, that it was going to be hard, but that was going to be the way that it was going to be unconditional, that despite what everybody thought, I could learn to love myself beyond what any other person thought, family, friends, bullies in school, anything. So it was going to be a hard lesson, but I was going to have these experiences in childhood and growing up. And I was going to be different from my parents. They were not going to approve of me, mostly my mom, and then kids weren't going to approve of me. And what's interesting about that is that we all have soul groups and that we're with in spirit. And my soul group is small. There are 6 souls in the soul group. Some soul groups have a lot more, but that being different was so important to my soul growth that this was one of the rare times where they were not going to incarnate with me, because I would know someone in my soul group. We would not be different. I mean, even if they came as an abuser, I know them as being in my soul group. So they were going to stay in spirit until this life was over for me. And because that was going to make it even more different for me, I was going to feel different. And so I have a soulmate, and that soul was, I said, well, I don't want to give up that one. So what ended up happening with that soul is that they were in my life for a very, very short time. I knew this person in high school. It was not a boyfriend, it was a friend, male friend. And we went to the movies once. And then one of us moved away or something, and that's all I saw of him. But what's interesting about that is, even though, there was no romance involved at all, I felt a connection that I just didn't understand at all. I mean, I felt like this electric connection that went beyond. I mean, I had little boys I was attracted to. Oh, he's so cute, I want to date. But this was not that. This was like a connection beyond all connections. And even to this date, I'll have dreams about this person. And I never understood the dreams until I had my session with Michael Newton and found out, oh, this is my soulmate. But other than that, the soul group was not going to be with me. And that was going to make it even more difficult.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, we do have, from my understanding as well, the soul groups and who's in it. And some, come and stay for a long time. Some choose to just be in certain time frames of our lives to help us and guide us. I've recognized a few in my own, and it's really amazing, interesting. I kind of wonder about this one, what's happened to them, and I've tried to look them up on social media and see if they're still out there. Now that I have a better understanding, and this was when I was a childhood, I was a Native American. We were camping, and there, out of the forest came this little girl, Buffy, and she was teaching me about nature and different things. She was Native American, and I really loved it. And we just connected. It was like, I don't know, it was just like me and her and just playing. Nothing else existed when I was around her. It was really euphoric, you know what I mean? And it was just amazing. And then it was time to go home from the camping trip. And I was like, I'm never going to see her again. And then she showed up at the school that I was for the next year, but for a very brief time. And I was like, yay. And I slept over her house, and, but there was that deep connection that you have with your soul team and those who came, that you agreed to come and play out the rules, for that.
Yeah, that's what I felt with this person. It was like something I could it didn't make any sense to me. Because I knew what it felt to have a crush on somebody, and this was not that. I mean, it was something much, much deeper. And I've actually, he has a pretty common name, but I'm protecting myself and my emotions by not looking him up on social media after, this was 1972. I'm not looking him up in 2025. My guide is telling me that would not be a good idea. So I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, I got the same message too, because like one of my past lives, I was a Native American myself, and I have strong connection, although this which I found out through regression. And there was this bear that spared my life because I was a boy in this life and I was out hunting them because it's the test of manhood, right? Are you going to be a hunter, a gatherer, or a shaman, right? And I wasn't able, when I came face to face finally after, I was out hunting this bear for days and days. And I leaned down in this stream, this brook to get some water. And then the bear knew I was hunting it and it was right in my face when I looked up. And I was like, oh my God. And in its eyes, I seen its spirit and it seen me and we parted ways. It spared my life because it could have killed me right then and there. I didn't have my weapons, nothing. um, to this, and once I found out about it, I was like, maybe I could try to, and they're like, no, no, that's not a good idea. But how would you even know? Because they're in a different form, right? And
Yeah.
a different past life. So I probably wouldn't even get to know anyway, unless I did a regression and figured it out. But yeah, it's not a good idea. It's just part of the path, and we got to
Yeah.
kind of enjoy it and understand it from there.
Yeah, this whole group, when I do regressions, this whole group is part of the other lives. I mean, at least some of
Mhm.
them. This is unusual.
Yeah, they do weave in together. Now, also on your website, there's a recording of one of your hypnosis sessions. So kind of wanted to share that in case anybody was interested. Anything you
Did
want to
you
share about that?
did you listen to it?
I did. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I would recommend if anybody's wants to do one to listen to that. Yeah, I do want to share something mini life between lives because it also goes into spirit. What's amazing about that past life regression, without summarizing the whole thing, I was a ruler of a country somewhere or not a country, a fiefdom in the Nordic area in like the 1250s. And what I want to say about that, which even amazed me, even though I knew that the life happened, but it still floored me, is that I had first names, and I'm not even good with names. I had first names. I had no last names, and I had no country. The Nordic region comprises 3 or 4 countries. So I tried in a crude way to look this up to see if I could find first name. Totally came up with nothing. And someone I became acquainted with looked it up on AI or something using a broader search. And in the regression, I was a ruler of a small country or a small fiefdom. I keep saying country, but it was a fiefdom. I had inherited it from my father. I had a younger brother. We were fighting over a piece of land with another fiefdom. The land was closer to the other fiefdom, and we were fighting with javelins and swords. And we were fighting over this piece of land. I was hungry for power as this ruler, and we ended up getting the land. And then the other side wanted the land back, and so they came and someone threw a javelin or sword through the palace window, and I was killed instantly. So when they looked it up, and I have never studied the history of the Nordic region, I have not. When they looked it up on AI, they found out that at that time, during that time period, there had been 100 years wars, a bunch of 100 years wars going on in the Nordic region. The AI said that they were still believing in reincarnation and the ability of souls to affect what happened on the earth.
Right.
And I was like floored because the whole thing, even though they couldn't find this person because I didn't have any information. And they also said it was not beyond possibility or probability that someone would be killed by a sword being thrown through a window. I can't say I was shocked, but I was like, oh my gosh, this regression is historically accurate. I'm like, everything I had in the regression checked out when they checked it out in history. They were able to find enough to verify it. And I was just like, it was amazing to me. Not that it wasn't true, but that it was actually a verifiable series of events. And I was so grateful for that, because I know a lot of these people listen to them and say, this is your imagination, you're making this up. But I just know, it was so nice to have one out there that had enough information that somebody was able to look up the information and find out, yes, these events actually happened.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of times if there's no evidence, people are like, no, it didn't happen, and so that is awesome that you're able to find some evidence there that is, and there's been others too who have found, information on theirs as well. So, it's definitely can be found if we have the right, a lot of things aren't kept and stored on record. Things have been abolished and gotten rid of because they don't want people to know for one reason or other, as far as history goes. And our systems teach us what they want us to know, not everything. Because you can learn something in our country and they have it one way, and you go to another country and it's a whole different perspective. And it's like, oh, well, and I've had that experience. It's like, okay, well, my country lied to me. They've told me and taught me this when we go to somewhere else. And somebody had stated that too. I forget the person's name, but it's a well-known quote, and I forget how it goes. And they say something about long lines. If you think you know everything, go outside of your country, and then you'll understand what that means. Because it's definitely everybody has their own history, which is different.
Yeah, I've talked to people recently about, I met people from Europe I went to the International Association of Near-Death Studies World annual conference, and I met people from other countries, and their view of the United States is very different from our view of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So definitely. So do you have anything else that you would like to share before we bring this into a close that we haven't discussed?
All I would want to share is, no matter what people are going through, and I know people go through very difficult things, a lot more difficult than what I went through, but there's always hope, and there's always a broader picture. I want to share briefly what happened in January. Where I grew up was Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles County, and many who will listen to this know that Pacific Palisades pretty much burned down in January of this year. My childhood, I was there till I was 20 or so. My childhood home burned down. I had two childhood homes that burned down, my elementary school, my high school. My mother, who has Alzheimer's, and my middle brother were living there when the fires came, and they both lost their homes. And that was very difficult. Fortunately, they're okay. But the point of that is that things do happen. Being on a spiritual path doesn't mean there won't be tragedy and difficulty. But having the spiritual awakening, which is continuing, it's a process, is not a bypass for, like, if someone passes, we're going to grieve. If something like the fire happens, we're going to grieve. But it's just so much different. I mean, it's a whole new perspective, and it's hard to describe an awakening except to say that it is an awakening. It's a knowledge that we're so much more than what we see. It's putting things into perspective. It's not sweating the small stuff. It's finding purpose. It's finding hope. It's finding joy. It's being connected with others. It's being connected to God. It's being connected to what really matters, which is the journey of the soul, and which is the journey of all souls together, making this planet a better place, gathering knowledge and bringing that knowledge back to God, bringing love back to God. And if anyone's even considering it, just start slow, just start reading about it. Find your own path. Each soul has their own path. Just take it into meditation and say, what's the right path for me? And start slowly, but don't be afraid to start.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah. And so definitely we all have our own path. There's many more ways than just one to it. And so we just have to find what's right for us in our soul and what we wanted to do. So thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing and being here. Now, would you want to let people know where they can find you and what you are offering?
Yeah, they can find me on my website. What I offer on the website is that if a little bit about my journey, they can contact me and talk to me about my journey if they're interested in talking about any facet of it and what I did, the spiritual regression, the cognitive work, the medication. They can talk to me about it. I can, once I would not, I would tell a lot of people not to do the spiritual regression if they haven't cleared out their thinking patterns, because that's the mistake. Well, I wouldn't say it's a mistake. It built the foundation, but I don't charge for what I do. It's a donation basis, but I basically just listen. I don't purport to be a counselor or a medical doctor, but I lend a sympathetic ear. And, if someone wants to talk to me, they can do it anonymously. But what I'll also say is that I'm now seeing my purpose and sharing as being much more than just stress related. So if you see the website and want to contact me for anything, even if it's just to say, hi, I just wanted to meet you, or I want to tell you, who I am, then don't feel you have to be in a stressful position to contact me. It's just the best way to contact me.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us here today. And I look forward to speaking to you some more. Maybe we can do another video at some point.
Well, thank you for having me. This is a great service you have.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about you and me. We're not the one and only. It's going to happen to everybody.